It is my great pleasure to moderate the next activity, and it's my honor to introduce Ms. Amira Elghawaby. A very short introduction because I think that she doesn't need to be introduced. So Ms. Elghawaby is the special representative on combating Islamophobia. She was appointed by the Prime Minister of Canada. Prior to this important position, she served as a journalist and a human rights activist. So she has clearly a lot to say on the reality of hate speech and practices in our country, and she's also well suited to talk to the best ways to basically combat not only Islamophobia, but all sorts of hate speech or hate-motivated actions. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Elghawaby.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chennoufi. Bonjour tout le monde. It's really lovely to be with all of you, distinguished guests and participants. And thank you for the opportunity to speak about the concerning rise of hate and Islamophobia in Canada against the backdrop of the current conflict in the Middle East. Very special thanks to the organizers, Yunus Zangibadi and Bijan Ahmadi, for putting what seems to have been such a lovely and very thought-provoking day for all of you. As Canada's special representative on combating Islamophobia, I am encouraged by the recognition that understanding and addressing the rise in hate and polarization around the world, including here in Canada, is and must be among the priorities for leaders and policymakers. Before I begin and delve into my remarks, I also want to respectfully acknowledge that I've had the privilege to grow up, live, work here in Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. So Islamophobia, or anti-Muslim hate, is on the rise in Canada and around the world. In 2021, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief reported that Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred are rising to epidemic proportions. Canada is not immune. Given my role and mandate, I have seen firsthand how the ongoing tensions and conflicts across the Middle East have fueled the increase of hate and Islamophobia at home. Canada, as many of you know, has long prided itself on being a mosaic of cultures and beliefs, a nation built on the principles of tolerance and respect and multiculturalism. Canada's Muslim communities, one of the fastest growing faith communities in the country, is an integral part of this mosaic and has immense potential to continue making valuable contributions to our country's vibrant democracy. But it's no secret that the ability of Muslims to be able to fully exercise their rights and freedoms, to fully participate in our society, has significantly been challenged over the past many years, and especially this past year. We have seen a stark increase in polarization as Canadians witness the humanitarian catastrophe continuing to unfold in the Middle East, and which are exacerbating trends that we had long been witnessing. We have increasingly seen a troubling rise in divisive rhetoric, acts of hate and intolerance, in misinformation, in disinformation tied to events overseas, having direct impacts here and fueling multiple forms of hate, including anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, and Islamophobia. The surge is not merely a byproduct of geopolitical tensions. This surge reflects deeper societal fractures that we must urgently address. Now, when I speak about Islamophobia, I want to be clear as to what I'm speaking about. Islamophobia is the racism, the stereotypes and prejudice, the fear or acts of hostility directed towards Muslims or people perceived to be Muslim. In addition to individual acts of intolerance and racial profiling, Islamophobia can lead unfairly to viewing and treating Muslims as a greater security threat on an institutional, systemic, and societal level. The Islamophobia landscape has dramatically altered in Canada. A national advocacy organization for Canadian Muslims reported a 1,300% increase in cases of Islamophobia in the first few weeks following October 7th. Other legal and social service agencies report similarly staggering increases in caseloads involving discrimination and hate, leading to heightened mental anguish and anxiety in our communities. The UK-based Institute for Strategic Dialogue found a 422% increase in Islamophobic social media content online over a similar time period. And last year, the Senate report on Islamophobia found that there are currently 3,000 anti-Muslim social media groups or websites active in Canada. According to the most recent figures from Statistics Canada, there was a 94% increase in police-reported hate crimes targeting Muslims in 2023. There was a 52% increase in hate crimes among Arabs and West Asians. Currently, the data is not intersectional, though Statistics Canada is working on that. And these numbers don't even tell the full story, given significant underreporting in these communities. Now, Canadians know firsthand the deadly consequences of such sentiments, how they threaten peaceful and inclusive societies. In 2017, 6 Canadian Muslim men were killed at the Quebec City Mosque after evening prayers. In 2020, a volunteer caretaker was stabbed to death in front of a mosque in Toronto while he was assisting with pandemic regulations. And in 2021, a family of 5 people were deliberately hit in London, Ontario, killing a mother, a father, a grandmother and sister, and leaving a young boy orphaned. Most people are unaware that Canada has the regrettable and heartbreaking distinction of having had the highest rate of deadly hate-motivated attacks against Muslims of any G7 country. Now, the impacts and harms for Canadian Muslims and those with intersecting identities, including Palestinian and Lebanese Muslims and non-Muslims, are also experiencing various kinds of racism, discrimination, and fear. The devaluation and dehumanization of Palestinian and Lebanese lives have a direct impact in Canada, leaving many feeling a pronounced sense of exclusion and a sense of second-class citizenship. Over the last year alone, I have heard from numerous members of our communities who have also felt unsafe and under attack on various fronts, including online. Here is just a brief example of what some Canadian Muslims have experienced. A visibly Muslim woman in Winnipeg was attacked by a man while she was in her car on the way to drop her son off at school. Video of the incident showed the attacker pounding on the window and trying to enter her vehicle while yelling Islamophobic and racist slurs. In Toronto, a man assaulted and harassed worshippers at the Toronto Islamic Center, including with the use of weapons. The same attacker then assaulted a visibly Muslim woman as she was walking down the street. He sprayed an unknown substance in her face, leading her to seek medical treatment at a hospital. In Hamilton, a man barged into a 3rd-grade gym class at a mosque and verbally threatened the students and teacher with Islamophobic and racist slurs. In London, Ontario, the home of a Muslim family was set on fire. Security video shows the perpetrator destroying lawn signs on the family's front lawn that express solidarity for Palestinian human rights and Our London Family signs in support of the commemoration before he set fire to their home. Not only are communities dealing with the repercussions of this constant threat of hate incidents and hate crimes, along with discrimination in schools, institutions, and other workplaces, but they are also having to daily witness the war in Gaza and Lebanon in real time, with those with loved ones in the region are particularly grieving and traumatized about what they are seeing every day. The impact on our young people is also especially stark, undermining their trust in the institutions they believed were committed to universal principles of human rights, inclusion, and equity for all. In 2023, it was the killing of Our London Family, as they are fondly remembered, that spurred the federal government to hold a federal Islamophobia summit in 2021, where Canadian Muslim communities made over 100 recommendations, including recommending the creation of this office. The Government of Canada was responding to and acknowledging that Islamophobia, along with other forms of racism, are a significant and urgent whole-of-society challenge, and that action was necessary to better support marginalized communities, including racial and religious minorities. The creation of this office in 2023 was an important milestone towards addressing this phenomenon. And the vision is simple. Help Canada be a place where all Canadians and newcomers are able to fully participate in every aspect of society, freely practicing their faith and expressing their diverse identities without fear or discrimination, in keeping with international commitments in our country's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Government of Canada has committed to addressing all forms of racism and hate, and just last week, the Prime Minister of Canada committed to adopting a definition of anti-Palestinian racism to describe the bias and discrimination far too many Canadian Palestinians are experiencing. Earlier this year, the Government of Canada launched its action plan to combat hate, which complements Canada's anti-racism strategy, and as well, online harms legislation currently has the potential to be another powerful tool in combating the hate we see online. Now, as we know, when we promote the outcomes of any one marginalized community, in essence, we support all communities facing barriers to their full participation as equal and valued members of our society. Despite the challenging times we find ourselves in, 2/3 of Canadians have recently reported that they are optimistic about where human rights are headed in this country, and that gives me hope. I am hopeful that we will disrupt the forces of polarization that threaten democracy if we root our approach to international or domestic conflicts firmly in human rights law and support humanitarian efforts. Before I conclude, I want to invite you all to sign up for our office's newsletter so that you can be up to date on all of the work we are doing. I will conclude with this little factoid. There was a Leger poll last year that found that nearly half of non-Muslim Canadians consider themselves to be allies to Muslim communities. If we work together, I'm confident that we can collaboratively tackle the stereotypes, racism, and fears about Muslims to ensure a brighter future for everyone. Thanks again to the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy for hosting this forum and for inviting me to speak to you today. Thank you.
All right, so I would like, of course, to open the floor to the audience to ask questions. But before that, I have two questions here. The first one is based on personal experience in 2021 after the truck attack that killed a family in London, Ontario. I went to the vigil, and there were obviously a lot of people with Arab and Muslim heritage, but also there were all sorts of Canadians of all sorts of ethnic, linguistic, religious, gender background. Okay. And my question for you, I guess, is how important do you think that building bridges between communities can better help fight not only Islamophobia, but every version of hate speech and action?
So that's a really important question, and that many people are asking it. How do we come together, especially when there are moments of such great tensions in our society as we see right now? And one of the things that I have often been saying is that it really is community relationships, the glue that already exists to a certain extent in neighborhoods, in communities, through social services, through various ways that people come together at kids' hockey tournaments, at the local library, that we have to really go back to the idea of the strengthening of our local relationships. So I'm going to give you an example right here from Ottawa. There is an organization that I visited on numerous times called Jewish Family Services of Ottawa. They've been in operation for decades. I actually first learned about them when I was a reporter at CBC, and I did a story with Mark Zarecki, who was its executive director, because his organization was working very hard to help welcome Somali refugees to the city. And from that moment, you really saw the importance of interfaith, intercultural communities coming together to support one another. And I'm very happy to share that to this day, not only does the organization continue to exist, but its staff is made up of people from a range of backgrounds, Muslim, Jewish, other faith groups, no faith group, and different cultural, different languages. And they continue to work together in the belief that they can build an Ottawa that is welcoming, that is safe for everyone, where people can fully contribute. It's those kinds of existing initiatives that we don't hear a lot about. What we hear, unfortunately, in the online space is people who are invested in creating division, who are trying to drown out and trying to erase the ability of people with differing viewpoints to fully practice and engage their civil liberties and their freedom of expression. How many times have we heard about peaceful protests being described as Hamas fests or Hamas supporters? This is unacceptable. This is limiting the ability for anyone to fully participate, whether they want to go to a peaceful demonstration. And of course, we condemn hate wherever it appears. We condemn all forms of hate. But at its core, the problem is it's those loudest voices that are setting the agenda, and it's really going to be important for us to listen to what's happening at the community level and think of the ways that we are going to strengthen that glue that holds us together, because in a time where so much is influenced from that online space, it becomes extremely dangerous for us to rely on, especially a platform like X that everyone's now trying to leave to go to Blue Sky, which is very confusing to figure out if you try it. But it's very dangerous. And so it's those local relationships, I think, that are going to get us through.
Thank you very much for your answer. I have a second question, and allow me to start by quoting what I remember from a very respectable person, Nelson Mandela. He's someone who I think that no one in this room can say that they suffered more than this gentleman. But he also said that holding a grudge is like swallowing poison and thinking that it's going to kill your enemy. Okay. So based on this quote, I would like to ask you, do you have a positive message for especially young people in this country, a message of resilience that shows that despite all the difficulties, they still have a horizon in our society?
Well, I mean, in journalism, I always go back to journalism, we have an expression that's show, don't tell. So we can tell young people that they have the right to participate, they have a right to expect a future where their rights are respected as Canadians. But we also have to show them. And unfortunately, over this past year, young people have been extremely disappointed with the institutional response to the war in Gaza, where there is a sense of betrayal that we've heard from communities and young people, where the value of Palestinian life has really not been at the same level of any other human life. And I think that for all the promises of international humanitarian law, of international principles of fairness and equality, young people are very smart people, and they're asking themselves, what is this lie that we've been fed, that there is an international order? And I was listening to John Allen, who it's a pleasure to see in the audience, speaking just earlier about that. And it's really that our young people are looking at all of this and asking themselves, what kind of future can I be optimistic about if it's a future where my loved ones or my community is seen as less than, and where the rules just simply don't apply?
Well, thank you very much. And basically, I asked you the question precisely because I'm fully aware of that. But the idea is just for a figure of authority and being who you are and your presence in our community, but also at the Canadian society at large. Hearing that, if not just fighting for their rights, is a way of having faith in the future. I think that it's an important thing, that despite all the difficulties, we remain positive, because if we let hatred eat us from inside, we've lost.
Well, I just also want to just say something that is important. A lot of times when I'm speaking to young people, it's not actually hatred that they're feeling. They're not feeling hatred. They're feeling, of others. Okay, good. Because, just on that point. So that's very difficult, though. So young people are just feeling, from what I hear, just so helpless, looking to adults and thinking, they're not showing me the way, and all the things that they say they're not doing. And then in terms of the hatred we get, it's extremely difficult to be optimistic. So maybe you're catching me before I have another coffee, but I will say that it's very difficult to be optimistic because of the huge oversized presence of the online space in our lives. And so that being said, I will, to your point, I can see, Miloud, do you want me to say something positive? So I will be positive. I'm actually often positive. It's the only way I get up in the morning. But I would say that they're also finding communities online to share in their grief and their pain, and to find resilience, and to show up and stand up for the human rights and for the civil rights that they know they deserve. So I think that we can take hope in their efforts to hold society up to what it's promised, to hold up a mirror to all of us, and to push all of us to do better.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I've talked too much, so I'm going to ask the audience, do you have a comment, a question? Please, sir.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Lunienga. I'm a Deputy Director for Canada's Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons, who's also Amira's counterpart. And Amira, I wanted to ask you a question about something that we've noticed on the anti-Semitism front, at least through our travels post-October 7th, and that is when we meet with police, with law enforcement, with university professors, with mayors, what we've noticed is almost a sense of crisis or a sense of paralysis in leadership, or sort of a fear to act or to speak against anti-Semitism, against Islamophobia. Folks are scared to talk and fear consequences, let it be cancel culture or what it may be. So my question to you is, what advice do you have for leaders who want to speak out, who want to address anti-Semitism, who want to address Islamophobia, but actually don't really know where to start or what to say?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you, Kevin, for all the work that you have been doing with the Special Envoy. It's really very inspiring as well, because this work is not one person, one office, one level of government, as you know. It's a whole of society approach. And so when you talk about leaders within police services, within universities, colleges, workplaces, it's absolutely true. We are all invested in figuring out the way forward. And so what I have seen in some of my engagements with different levels of government or institutions is where there was strong relationships already in community. Again, I'm going to go back to the glue that keeps us all together. Where there was relationships, navigating the times we're in and navigating how to approach this very difficult time has been easier. But where there were no relationships existing, and all of a sudden, a police chief is getting to know the local Muslim or Jewish community, that means that you're trying to build something while you're in that crisis mode, and it's very difficult. And so I guess the quickest piece of advice in this kind of setting would simply be to really listen. These leaders need to continue to listen to their own constituents, not to the loudest voices nationally or those who are invested in, again, as I say, being divisive, erasing each other, trying to create an echo chamber where they're the only ones who are right and nothing else matters, but really listening to the people they serve and helping them to guide. And on the hate crimes piece, we actually last year, before this began, had launched an anti-Muslim hate crimes guide, and there's a sister companion, an anti-Jewish hate crimes guide done by the OSCE, which has excellent advice on how law enforcement can be better engaged in their communities and how they ensure that they are providing proper support. And it shouldn't be any surprise that the top 10 practical tips they give for the Muslim community are the same top 10 practical tips for the Jewish community, and then onwards and onwards to any community. Essentially, there is a way to do this. That is a cookie-cutter way, in a sense, because there is a way to build that trust with different communities who are going to be victimized, sadly, in different times, as we saw during the pandemic, where Asian Canadians increased an immense amount of hate, for instance.
Yes, please.
I moderated the last panel. I had a question about systemic racism and how you are charged with addressing that as a problem within our policy community. I had an opportunity and a privilege to work with Huda McBeal, former CSIS officer. We were one of the first, my students and I were one of the first people to interview her experience working within CSIS. And she makes a very important point, which is neglecting or marginalizing her voice within that intelligence and security community actually compromised Canadian interests abroad. So ultimately, the rejection of a broader set of viewpoints would put Canada in a more hazardous place. And she was very successful in making that point. She published a book through McGill Queen's University Press, and ultimately I think it won a prize this year. So we need more examples of that, but she makes a very strong case as to why systemic racism within our policy establishment, primarily Department of National Defence, to some extent Global Affairs Canada, certainly CSIS, persists in the form of undermining our credibility abroad and our ability to be effective. It's not just about doing the right thing, but also demonstrating that racism undermines our ability to engage in the world, but also act on our interests. And that message doesn't seem to be hitting home. So I'm just wondering to what extent you're addressing that issue, or who might be responsible for addressing that issue.
No, it's a very important question, and I would say that addressing systemic racism is sometimes feels like a much steeper hill to climb because it's obviously embedded, and as you may know, working within any type of bureaucracy, there's a lot of, I call it Alice in Wonderland meets the Matrix, like how am I going to navigate this system to figure out how do I provide the best advice to help often very well-meaning public servants do the right thing and figure out the right thing together. So my office has a mandate to ensure that there is anti-Muslim or anti-Islamophobia training available to national security agencies specifically, but also writ large. So we're working with the Canada School of Public Service right now. I have delivered workshops to a multitude of departments, including worked with CSIS and worked with others. So again, though, I want to emphasize it cannot be just one office. It cannot be just one person. It really has to be integrated within the way things are done. And on that point, in terms of undermining Canada, there was issues with, for example, the no-fly list that was raised a few years ago, and how babies were on the no-fly list, and how much of a waste of resources it is to have to flag people who repeatedly over and over again, and what are you missing if you're putting your resources and focusing on people who simply just for their name match. And so the government spent quite a bit of money to create the whole redress system after that. And so you have examples where, if you don't listen to communities, and that was from a community push saying this is not right, we can't have primarily Muslim Canadians who are being swept up in this no-fly list be treated this way, but it actually, in its essence, by solving that issue, you were making the system much more responsive and tailored to addressing the safety concerns that it was meant to address in the first place. So that's an example. Also, in terms of far-right extremism, right before the attack on Quebec City, CSIS had closed its desk on far-right extremism in this country. And so we, within communities, were saying and watching and citing experts who are saying there was more and more threats happening in terms of potential attacks against Muslims or other minority communities. And so, sadly, was something missed because of that? And that goes directly to the safety of Canadians. So your point is really well taken.
I wish we had more time. I'm sure that many in the audience would have liked to ask more questions. I know that I have more questions for you, but our time is up. Thank you very much for joining us. And please join me to thank once again Ms. Elghawaby for her